This video is brought to you by Dashlane. Make your internet life more practical and safer with the link down below. When AMD released the Athlon 200GE, it set a new standard for what you could get on the ultra-low budget category for using new parts. It being a non-gaming branded component made it a great deal for many countries where used gaming parts are inflated in price and provided a way to build a modern PC for cheap with a clear upgrade path. And the integrated graphics were pretty good, running a variety of newer, lighter games and many of the heavier ones with enough sacrifices, which made it my new target computer for pretty much every video I have made on a recently released game. I was hoping Intel would respond and we will have an interesting low-end competition, but they seem entertained with recovering ground in the super high-end area or their upcoming dedicated GPUs. In the meantime, AMD released another one. This is a welcome surprise. After all this year, Ryzen APUs got a bump to Zen Plus and a change in thermal materials that make them overclock like crazy. So what fabulous improvements come with the new Athlon? It's like the same chip with slightly higher clocks. They did not even change the bugs, they're exactly the same. What? Okay, so the new Athlon 200G isn't a groundbreaking improvement. I will not be surprised if this is a refactor of the 240G or something, so in terms of base performance for the 3000G, you can expect basically what the 200G did, but just a bit better for $5 less, which on its base is not a terrible deal. However, we're barely into the intro of this video, so you might already know that that is not the whole story. Some time ago, a BIOS update accidentally allowed for multiplier overclocking on the old Athlon 200GE. What that meant was that while you could not change the integrated graphics, the CPU itself could be easily overclocked close to 4 GHz, which took it from good to terrific. Which is why most motherboards not so accidentally introduced BIOS updates to allow for this. To my surprise, AMD actually took notice and made this a feature for the new 3000G. That means full CPU overclocking and full GPU overclocking, which you can likely push very far just with the dinky tiny included cooler, thanks to its stupidly low TDP, and that is very exciting. While you can overclock using the Ryzen Master app, the SoC voltage was mysteriously missing from the version I was using, so you might prefer to just use the BIOS or a combination of BIOS and Ryzen Master. I was able to pull the CPU to 4 GHz using the CPU voltage of 1.325 and GPU all the way to 1700 MHz with a GPU voltage of 1.3 and an SoC voltage of 1.2625. If any of the two were lower, it will blue screen. All of this while still keeping temperatures much lower than I would expect under full load. The only reason I did not push it further was that the voltages were getting a little bit high. On the Athlon 200GE, I was unable to use RAM speeds over 2666 MHz, as it was the maximum supported speed. This has not changed for the 3000G, but I was able to push it all the way to 3000 MHz while still perfectly stable. I'm not sure if this is because of my specific unit or improvements on the motherboard BIOS, but given that the integrated GPU use RAM as VRAM, this extra bandwidth is going to make a world of difference. So what does that mean in terms of gaming? I, of course, started with games that are perfectly appropriate for a $50 APU, like Red Dead Redemption 2. Welcome to the LowSpecGamer. I made a video recently applying extreme graphical tweaks on this game for the locked Athlon 200GE, and it could barely pull 720 at 50% resolution scale at 30 FPS. Now, thanks to the hearty overclock, the benchmark averages over 30 FPS while on 1080, 50% vanilla lowest settings with no special game destructing tweaks applied, which is not a bad start at all. It can play Red Dead Redemption 2, although at the lowest settings. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is another interesting example, albeit for an entirely different reason. On my recent video on this game, I show how to force the hidden low settings. On the video, I also said that internal resolution could not be changed, which turns out was wrong, because you can totally change it in the configuration file as long as you have dynamic resolution disabled on the menu. I replicated these low settings except for shadows, which I left on medium, since that is one of the tweaks that can cause a lot of graphical glitches. This is 1080p, 50% resolution scale, and to my surprise, even without the help of the low resolution shadows, I saw the game keeping over 30 FPS on the heaviest combat scene. As I have said before, if it can 30 FPS this scene over here, it can do much higher in most of the game. Excellent. Apex Legends is another good one, if anything because I have been really getting into this game lately again. While forcing the game to use low poly models for best performance has been blocked in the configuration file, you can still disable shadows with a tweak from my video, and using this and the overclock, I was suddenly able to play at 720p, way better than I thought. Considering how I had to use 540p to get this working on the 200GE, this is way more of an upgrade than I expected. Now, the Assassin's Creed Odyssey benchmark is very useful because it tends to push hard both the GPU and the CPU. I first started on vanilla lowest settings and 50% resolution scale at 1080p, and we get an unstable 30 FPS with a GPU bottleneck, which is not bad considering how this game tends to do with integrated GPUs. Using the configuration file, as described on the video I did ages ago, I disabled some post effects, reduced texture streaming, and forced 30% resolution scale to force a CPU bottleneck, and in there I got an average of 40. Not bad for one of the most CPU intensive games I know. Thanks to its overclock, it can theoretically do 30 FPS very stably right now with a dedicated GPU on the low settings, which will be freaking good. Far Cry 5 benchmark. No tweaks, 1080p, 50% resolution scale again, and the result is a 43 FPS average on lowest settings. You're probably seeing a trend right now at this point. Thanks to the overclock, most games I threw at this could at least do 30 FPS or more at a 50% resolution scale from 1080, or sometimes full 720p, occasionally necessitating non-destructive low-spec tweaks. Wolfenstein 2, the game I love to use for GPU torture testing, 1080p, 50% resolution scale again, lowest settings, and the console tweak to disable shadows from its video. The game tends to use a lot of VRAM, so the RAM overclock here is making a heck of a difference, as I could not get a performance like this on the 200GE on 1080. Witcher 3, no tweaks, just the normal lowest settings and 720p while running on a heavier city, close to a stable 30 FPS with maybe occasional load drops. Look, I think the point has been made. The integrated GPU on this thing, when overclocked, can do a variety of heavy stuff much better than I expected. If you actually try a game that is lighter, like Devil May Cry 5 at 1080p but a 70% resolution scale, you can actually hope for almost 60 FPS and a fluid experience, which is amazing and so much better than I expected. So should you get one of these? Depends. If there is one point that I'm hopefully getting across is that the magic of this device is on its overclock ability, and the bad thing about overclocks is that it depends on a lot of other components. If your power supply is cheap, unreliable, and has trouble cleaning up electrical ripple, then your motherboard has to do the job of cleaning that, and if your motherboard is also cheap and does not really have a heatsink for voltage regulators, you might not get too far with this. If you have an Athlon 200GE and a motherboard with okay heatsinks that supports overclocking, it is an option if you still do not have the funds for a dedicated GPU or a full Ryzen APU. If you have to change the motherboard, then the money might go better for a Ryzen APU. It all depends on price. If in your territory you can find it similarly priced to a 200GE and significantly lower than a Ryzen 2200G or a new 3200G, it is absolutely worth it. If anything, we at least have a new, cool component to cater to the low-budget crowd, and given the usual lack of options, I'm happy they listened and gave us something overclockable. I think the results speak for themselves. And if you're planning to build a new PC using components like this, the first thing you might want to install is Dashlane, one of this channel's longtime sponsors and supporters. Dashlane is a mobile and desktop app that helps generate and keep tracks of all your passwords, fill forms with one-click login, and autofill for personal info and payment details. Unlike browser-specific solutions that lock you to a specific system, Dashlane works on most browsers on every device, across Windows, Linux, iPhone, and Android, and it allows you to respond easily to breaches and hacks with personalized security alerts. All passwords are stored in a locally encrypted storage that only you have the password for, so not even Dashlane can see your data. And using unique passwords makes you safe from the constant password leaks that seem to be more common with each passing year. Heck, it even comes with a VPN. I have used this in the past to access region-locked games, so it works well. If you use the link dashlane.com/LowSpecGamer, you can try it for free for 30 days with no credit card required at sign-up. And if you like it, you can get a yearly membership for 10% off with the code LowSpecGamer. I use Dashlane every day myself, if not for the convenience, for the security that it gives me against password leaks. Thank you to them for sponsoring this video, and you for watching.